Featuring prominent industry vendors, moderated by an independent analyst, Solutions Review presents the Expert Roundtable, an in-depth panel discussion focused on solving strategic enterprise challenges.
I'm Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review, and welcome to this Cloud Security Roundtable, getting ready for an AI-driven future. For this event, we've brought together expert technology builders from two of the fastest growing cloud security providers, Cohesity and Dig Security, just acquired by Palo Alto Networks. Given the rapid developments in generative AI and the inevitable impact it will have on the enterprise, our panelists will explore the challenges presented by the changing security landscape and discuss specific use cases for data security and data management. To drive this conversation, we've invited veteran data expert David Lotion. Recognized as an information management industry thought leader, David is president of the firm Knowledge Integrity. He has also been an analyst for TDWI and a regular contributor to TechTarget. David is also a senior lecturer and faculty lead for the Careers and External Relations program at the University of Maryland's College of Information Studies. David, I'm going to turn it over to you now. Thanks for being with us today.
Thanks so much, Doug. It's really great to be here to have this conversation. Just again, my name is David Lotion. I'm the president of Knowledge Integrity, and I'm also a faculty member at University of Maryland. And my crowning achievement right now is as an expert with Solutions Review at their site, www.insightjam.com. Today, we've got a great conversation. The words on everybody's minds these days is artificial intelligence, AI, and that's what we're going to talk about in terms of cloud data management, cloud security. So I've got a couple of guests today. I'm going to toss it over to them to introduce themselves. I'm going to start with Dan Benjamin from Dig Security. Dan, tell us a little bit about yourselves.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Hi, everyone. I'm Dan. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Dig Security. Dig Security is a cloud data security company. We help organizations protect data in public clouds like AWS and Azure and GCP and Snowflake. And basically, we help organizations, first off, understand what data do they even own across their databases and buckets and analytics data stores. Second, we help organizations classify this data. Third, of course, we help them understand, do they have inherent data risk inside their environment? And lastly, we monitor every type of data interaction to identify when something goes wrong. We call that data detection and response. And today we work with dozens of enterprise customers around the globe, from finance to insurance to retail and tech, and super excited to talk about data security and AI and everything around that topic today. Thanks for inviting me.
Great. Thanks, Dan. And now I'm going to hand it off to Greg Staton from Cohesity. Greg, tell us a little bit about yourselves and your company.
Yeah, thanks a lot. My name is Greg Staton. I work in our office of the CTO, responsible for our data and AI initiatives at Cohesity. And remind everybody out there, Cohesity is an AI-driven data protection, data security, data management company focused on protecting enterprise data, securing that data that's become protected, giving customers the ability to move that data wherever they see fit, whether it's be on-prem to the cloud or through our as-a-service offerings, access that data. And now, most importantly, we've introduced a deeper insights pillar, pairing all that data protection data with generative AI to drive deeper insights and analytics through semantic search, conversational question and answer, as well as some really other cool new features we're bringing out along the way.
Thank you, Greg. So let's kind of jump into this. I'm going to preface this a little bit by saying that I think now we're about a year into the hyping of generative AI and large language models, and I think most organizations, if they're not already trembling because they're fearful that they are falling behind their competitors, they're mostly looking at these technologies and trying to decide what exactly they want to be able to do with it. The excitement about being able to take advantage of this type of technology has to be buffered by the concerns that can begin to emerge when the organizations start thinking about, well, wait a second, what are the risks that we need to deal with? And Dan, you said the magic words. You said data risk, and focusing on specific. There are all sorts of different types of data risk, but let's focus specifically on security. And Dan, I'm going to go to you first. What should the top security concerns be for chief technology officers, chief information officers, even chief analytics officers and chief risk officers when defining their AI strategy?
Definitely. So I have a conversation, I think, every single day about this specific topic with chief information security officers from all around the globe. And typically what you see is that most of their boards are pushing them to adopt AI, to pushing them to adopt LLM. They want them to enable the business to kind of use these types of technologies to kind of faster develop and essentially bring new functionality. But all of them don't have the capability today to understand, first off, what AI models are already deployed inside the organization. How is that data? I mean, what type of data do they actually access? How do we govern these types of LLM models? And how do we make sure that when we do adopt these types of technologies, we don't have leakage, right? We've all seen kind of these demos that you have data exfiltration from models and you have shadow data. So the ability for us to first off understand how do we securely adopt it by finding LLM models, by essentially understanding what data goes in and out, how are they being used by each one of our applications and users and vendors, and then essentially having a proper compliance scheme. I think that's number one.
Thanks. Well, so Greg, let me turn over to you. I mean, you guys have a little bit of a different view on this topic. What should the top security concerns be?
Well, no, I think Dan hit the nail on the head. I think a lot of it comes down to secure, safe, and governed access to data. I think the first wave of this Gen AI revolution was originally around models, and so like, hey, who can build the largest model, the smallest model? How quick can they respond to real easy prompts? This next phase is going to really drive the enterprise use cases, and really what's going to be the key to that is access to data. And I think CIOs and CTOs and CISOs really need to think, especially when they look back onto what happened with the initial cloud computing revolution. There was this big boom of shadow IT, where IT came in and said, hey, we're not going to adopt these new technologies, or the business would say they wouldn't adopt these technologies, but individuals would find ways to bring cloud technologies into the organization to make things be easier for them. Same exact thing is going to happen with Gen AI, AI and ML tools, is employees will find the benefit for themselves. And if enterprises want to make their individuals more productive through these tools, they need to provide that safe, secure, and governed access to that data, be able to monitor who's accessing what, are they allowed to access that, where is that data going, do we have secure contracts with these LLM vendors, are they reusing that data to train, is it being destroyed after the fact? I think understanding and adopting a sound strategy early on is going to help mitigate the risk of shadow AI in their organizations, but also will make them think about how to safely and securely provide access to that data to drive efficiencies in these other organizations cross-functionally.
So I want to cycle around something that both of you guys sort of brought up, and I'm not really sure that it's specifically about security or securing the organization from a lockdown structure, but rather, you both use the term governance, and I think that there's an evolving view or perspective that there's multiple layers of governance with AI, some of which is associated with protection of sensitive information, and then the next level is, or rather protection against unauthorized use of sensitive information. The second is actually, Greg, you kind of just touched on it, which is and Dan, I think you used the term leakage. I think in some perspectives, the use of these LLMs in accessing data for which the organization doesn't really have the privileges or the rights to use. And I've seen a bunch of articles that are talking about copyright and that sort of thing. How does that intersect with what you guys are looking at in terms of data security in the cloud and an AI strategy? Greg, I'll turn to you for this one because you kind of brought it up.
Yeah, no, that's a really big question, a really broad question. Let's kind of break it down. But you did hit on something very, very interesting. around understanding the sensitivity of a particular piece of data and whether that piece of data should be used in a Gen AI world or shouldn't be. I think a lot of enterprises find themselves behind the eight ball here. Is they don't know if a random piece of data in their infrastructure is sensitive. Does it contain PI, credit card information? Does it hold trade secrets? And so I think they first need to look at tools to help them classify and understand their data. And then once that has been classified and understood, they need to then pour that through a governance framework model that they can set up to say, hey, these particular individuals have access to these pieces of data. Now that they have that in place, then it's, hey, we have these generative AI tools. Are we using the correct model? Are we going to use a model as a service from one of the cloud vendors? Are we going to develop our own in-house model to understand how that data is used within the model framework? And you have to understand the legal contracts behind that. Do some companies say in their contracts that, hey, we're going to take your prompt and response data, and we're going to use that to retrain the model? Obviously, enterprises do not want that, and they shouldn't be using that. And so I think it is a multifaceted problem, but I think a lot of it starts very early on of like, hey, enterprises need to understand their data before they jump into using their data with these tools.
Yeah, Dan, I have to admit, I've watched some of your posts on LinkedIn that are touching upon the same topic, and I saw you in an animated way nodding your head to what Greg was saying. Can you add to this whole concept of I think what do you think that data security is really meaning these days? It's more than just putting up a chain link fence around your around your data center. So what do you think that is these days?
So I think that any organization today that is trying to block the use of AI is going about it in the wrong way, okay? When security teams are going against something that the organization really wants, you're essentially tackling this in the wrong way, because then they will try to hide it from you. Okay, so as a security team, I always say that you need to enable the business units to properly adopt new types of technologies in a secure way. So that means, as Greg mentioned, understanding what data goes in and what data goes out. What can't we do, right? A lot of organizations, for example, that write code are unable to use, for example, ChatGPT responses because they're not sure that the code does not have copyright issues, right? Some organizations will want to train the model with their own premises versus training it as a SaaS solution. So understanding what are the limitations, let's say kind of the outer edges, and then kind of narrowing down to the organization, to specific types of technologies, I think that's the way to go about it.
So that being said, I think that gives us the opportunity to kind of frame our perspective of what some of these frameworks really mean. And I'm going to ask, in our prior conversations, we've heard this term data security posture management. Dan, I'm going to go to you. Can you explain this concept of data security posture management and clarify, when should an organization consider implementing something like that, and maybe what are the expectations? What are the key indicators that an organization should have a data security posture management?
So first off, data security posture management talks about how do we visualize and contextualize risk coming from our data? How do we understand what data do we own? Where is that data being stored? How is it being used? And do we have any types of compliance and privacy risks? Or do we have security risks that are imminent from having or using a specific piece of information? It's a category that has been growing super quickly over the past couple of years. Gartner put it as kind of the up-and-comer in the data security realm. And now we're seeing that mostly any organization that has regulated data, whether they have PCI data or HIPAA, or are regulated specifically by specific privacy regulations like GDPR and CCPA and LGPD in Brazil, are now adopting DSPM technologies, especially because the adoption of cloud and Gen AI technologies is kind of rapidly evolving their cloud expansions. They're not running in a single cloud. They're not running on 2 or 3. So they doubled and tripled the actual variety of data stores that they own. They're not running a single data store. They're running 20 different types and thousands of data store technologies. So the whole concept behind a data security posture management solution and a data security platform is the ability to first off understand and answer a key question. What data do I even own? Across my databases, my buckets, my data warehouses, and so on, and answer that in a simple manner. Then, of course, answer more complex questions. Am I compliant with PCI? Am I compliant with that privacy law? Where do we have social security numbers? Should we have even social security numbers? And if we do, can we explain why? And then, of course, how can we actually protect that data at rest, in motion, and use across my stack? And I think, again, the rapid adoption of both clouds and AI technologies that are pushing us into the cloud, because it's much easier to do it in the cloud, is what is kind of bringing us into these types of technologies today, and why DIG in this category has been growing so quickly.
So I'm kind of interpreting what you're saying in two different ways. One is in terms of what is also being referred to as data literacy. Talking about what data do we have and where is it and how is it distributed and on what platforms and what kind of information is in there. And Greg, before you referred to semantic layers and semantic interpretations, which I think is becoming critical, especially in this concept of DSPM. Your thoughts on signs that an organization needs one, and then maybe add on to this. How does this pertain to the types of data risks or AI risks that we were talking about just before a few minutes ago?
It's critical to understand the data so that you can start figuring out, like we talked about before, in that kind of governance model of who should be able to access it, where should it live. But then also from a DSPM perspective, like understanding that blast radius of that data, because especially when you get out into the cloud, if you're looking at a particular database or a particular bucket, who has access and what other applications through those roles have access to this. You can start to really spider out quickly and lose control on, or lose kind of a handle on who has access to what and where. But now we're starting to describe a lot of that data and infrastructure, which then feeds directly into, being able to leverage that data safely, securely, and responsibly with next generation AI tools. I think, from a Cohesity perspective, if we look also at the data protection, data management side of it, the DSPM idea and concept is super critical. Being able to kind of understand what's going on in real time and environment, and then being able to respond to that from a data management, data security perspective. If there's an event, to be able to bring that data back, or to be able to tag and classify that data. Again, it's adding more descriptors to that data and infrastructure, which then can be used by machines later down the line, whether these machines be Gen AI tools, other AI ML tools, or in our case, data security, data management platforms.
So we've been talking around the concept of AI, and then you basically brought up the concept of enablement. So let's drill down into this a little bit and talk a little more about what are our expectations for artificial intelligence in its most recent formation in the generative AI and the large language models and those types of things. Dan, what do you and DIG Security, what do you see as the biggest benefits to enterprises that can adopt a sound yet at simultaneously flexible AI strategy early on?
So I think the good thing about what's coming here is democratization of AI technology, right? What used to be difficult is not difficult anymore. Now, I think one of the hardest challenges in computer science in general, and when we talk to organizations with 50 petabytes of data, 60 petabytes of data. It's ununderstandable kind of volume of information. So the ability to understand data at large scale and deduce consequences or results from a specific piece of information is uncanny. We can essentially solve problems that we didn't even dream about solving in the past. And I think With that, we can utilize that in every aspect of what we do today, whether it is discussions with customers, whether it is understanding information that up until now, unless you were a data scientist, you couldn't do. Whether it is even a dig, we use LLM models constantly, right? Because we need to understand the data in the customer environment. Now, simple regex classifications or finding a social security numbers, that's an easy problem. Understanding that this is a document that essentially belongs to the HR team and it talks about a contract of Greg, okay? That is a much harder problem that we can solve without LLMs. And doing this at scale, when the world keeps on producing additional information at such a massive scale, I think it both presents an opportunity to solve critical problems that most organizations hold today, but it will also pose challenges as our adversaries are going to utilize the same types of technologies to essentially attack us as an organization and attack us in unique mechanisms that up until now we couldn't think about, and we wouldn't be able to actually defend without using AI as well. So it's really, really cool. It's kind of a chicken and egg, but I think it's a necessary evil, and I think we're going to gain more than what we're going to lose in general.
Greg, let's turn to you. Same question.
Yeah.
Without repeating what Dan just said, because I thought that was actually quite spot on. What do you guys see as biggest benefits to enterprises that adopt a sound but flexible AI strategy early on?
Yeah, so over the last year or so that we've been kind of building out our own internal Gen AI tooling and feature set, we've been speaking to a lot of large organizations about some of the core problems that they had, and really like the low-hanging fruit when it came to pairing generative AI with a lot of internal data sets is around compliance and rudimentary e-discovery processes. And so being able to create a semantically aware index of data and allow people to ask questions and understand more information about it took this process of compliance audit or compliance problems or e-discovery checks, where you had the notion of an incident, you had to then define the data kind of blast radius of that, and then it took a lot of people hours to sift through all of that data to identify the relevant pieces of this. Through semantic indexing and generative AI question and answer responses, we can reduce that time to discovery from hundreds, if not thousands of people hours down to a single couple of people asking questions and filtering that data set down. And so this was a no-brainer to us, and that's kind of what started us going down the path. Things that started to emerge that were really interesting is, and this kind of cuts across discipline and across enterprise function, is knowledge gap. And so now you have this concept of a lot of people joining into a workforce or changing careers, changing focuses, where there's an established and existing tool set. That established and existing tool set speaks a particular language and has a particular vernacular. And this could be even individual companies have this. These tools, these LLM tools can act as a translation engine between, what I know as a Luddite human and what this other organization knows that has 25, 50, or 100 years worth of history behind it. And it can translate in both directions. So being able to kind of treat this LLM as an entity that has a perfect grasp of your native language. And then with kind of semantic search and index, I can then find pieces of bespoke kind of curated content that are related to what I'm talking about from that particular enterprise or function or application or product, and then present my findings to the LLM and say, hey, here's my question. Here's a body of work. Create me an answer to my question and allow me to kind of do further research without having to spend a decade learning, the ins and outs of a particular application. These are where enterprises are going to get just really quick wins. They're going to be able to accelerate their team's performance, reduce the amount of time it takes to onboard and ramp individuals, and find massive benefits as long as they set up kind of a safe, secure, governed, and responsible access to that that data.
So I'm listening to you talk, and ideas are kind of flying around my head. Again, kind of dovetailing what both of you just said. I mean, Dan, in terms of description of saying, well, we have these technologies, but our adversaries or the people we are trying to save your organizations from have the same capability. So let me pose this. It's kind of like a thought experiment. To what extent can you guys be using generative AI, from a semantic perspective, as essentially as a cognitive cybersecurity utility, to be able to look for perhaps accesses of different data items across the hybrid multi-cloud environment that are behaviorally questionable or raise red flags? I mean, is that something that you guys see a way of using AI in those types of cases? And if so, how would you integrate that into your data security posture?
I actually don't think it's a new problem. It's a new place that we need to tackle, or it's a new category that we need to tackle, but it's not a new problem. Basically, we're talking about, first off, how do we make sure that our data has the right posture in a static manner? And second, we're asking, how do we make sure that no one is abusing the information that we have, potentially trying to leak it, or just trying to understand something that they shouldn't touch?
Exactly.
The static risk analysis is data risk assessment, or DSPM in the kind of new term, and real-time data activity monitoring. Today we call it DDR. In the past we called it UEBA. There's a lot of different types of terms that we used to use. It's just in different types of locations. In the past, we only did kind of database activity monitoring, trying to understand what types of queries are people running. Then we expanded that into buckets. Then we expanded that into analytics data stores. And now we're basically saying, well, I have 20 different types of data store technologies. Can I have an overarching technology that will try and kind of find when someone is doing something bad with data? Either it is through an AI model, either it is through direct queries or direct interactions. Now, the use of AI can accelerate our response and our learning of what is good and what is bad. The problem today is that there's too much fragmentation. There is no capability for any single organization today, if they have 20 or 30 different types of data store technologies, to understand what are the good actions and what are the bad actions, unless they have a very, very, very large team. So the use of AI, the understanding of data, the understanding of what's good and bad can only be done today with large data processing and the use of LLM and AI technologies. Otherwise, it's just an impossible task. So accelerating DDR, bringing that into markets and understanding in, out, what's good and what's bad is, I think, where we're headed with AI introduction.
Let me kind of move on. We've got another question that's talking about security risks. And I think that this was kind of directed at this whole concept of emerging security risks that 5 years ago nobody would have ever thought of, and we can all probably think of a lot of those old ones, and we can probably think of a few new types of security risks like what we were just talking about. When implementing AI in an enterprise. But what are Greg? Let me go to you on this. What are some of the lesser talked about concerns that you and your clients are starting to see?
Yeah, I think early on, when OpenAI started to become a lot more popular and people started playing with it more and more, where some of the bigger concerns weren't necessarily like inherent technology concerns. It was actually understanding some of like just the rudimentary terms and conditions of these tools that they were using. It's like, oh, hey, I can get like answers to questions. Well, let me start copying in my corporate email into this and get it to summarize, or I have my Zoom transcription. Let me get it to ask questions on it. Well, a lot of those companies were using and harvesting that data to make their models better. And they agreed to it because they were just clicking ELUAs. And so I think, that was something early on that then corporate IT was like, whoa, time out. We need to kind of slowly roll this out and use this. I think one of the other things that is starting to get talked a lot more, especially when companies are using their own data to help drive context for conversations, is hallucination. I think a lot of people will kind of talk about the buzzword of hallucination, like, oh, does your product hallucinate? Well, I was like, you got to understand what some of that actually means and not just say the word. So understanding that sometimes a model may respond as if it knows the answer. Like it'll say, yeah, of course the sky is purple. Well, no, it's actually not. It's blue or dark, depending on what time of day it is. But understanding kind of a lot of those outer limits of a model. And then that got to kind of the final thing is understanding like how to construct the questions or the prompts in a way that these models can then interpret and interact with correctly. And I used to kind of always say there was no such thing as a dumb question until the world of large language models came out. And I started tossing internally developed tools out to other folks internally and kind of monitoring the questions and the answers and realizing, hey, there's a whole host of training that we need to go through to teach people how to form a good question. And so, being able to kind of be descriptive and kind of leverage these tools to the best of their ability, because you'll get to a point where people will start to use the tools. They won't get the desired outcome. They think the tool is crap when it's kind of learning how to use this new tool and framework effect.
Interesting. Dan, I'm going to go to you on this one. What are some of the lesser talked about concerns of implementing an AI strategy in the enterprise?
So I think when people talk about AI risk, people are talking about kind of the obvious stuff, right? ChatGPT online or data leakage from a model. And I think that's kind of the already known, right? What people don't understand and they kind of think that it's kind of out of the box is how do you properly do model security, right? And people think that there's solutions out there out of the box that can essentially do this kind of testing. I feel that we're so early in that category today that it just becomes kind of a services play. And the people that can actually test it need to properly test each one of your models to make sure that it doesn't leak data or you can't tamper it or you can't poison the actual information that is already inside. So I actually think that the other problems are problems that we're going to solve in the next year. Okay, finding our models, making sure that no data leaves kind of our environment the next year, the next 2 years. I think that the actual model security, this is a big problem that will take a couple of years to kind of start seeing initial results as companies will start popping out. Because understanding what the model needs to do and how do we need to test it in an automated fashion and not a services play, I think it will take a long time.
Well, let's circle around back to Greg on this one. Testing models. What are your thoughts on that? It seems like, if Dan's thinking that's going to be a couple of years before we're at a point, yet if everybody's jumping into this right now, are we not at a huge risk of again, and I'll kind of cycle back on something else that you guys said before, which is, most people are not sophisticated enough in terms of understanding the underlying technology to differentiate between an AI model that is essentially, when we talk about generative AI, it is a model that is generating, highest probability expectation for what would be a reasonable answer, as opposed to what a lot of folks that have been talking to me about this or asking me questions is this presumption that these AI entities are living beings with their own brains that are drawing conclusions and making decisions. As much as I want to believe, our science fiction writers and moving towards the future, how do we, number one, how do we raise awareness about that subtlety, and number two, how do we integrate testing into our model development so that we've got a secure confidence in the results that are coming out?
Yeah, no, I think that's a huge one. And I think, this kind of starts from the category leaders and kind of trickles down. And I think there needs to be an open and honest framework for testing. I think we need to understand, especially if you look at the big model vendors now, they need to provide open benchmark results on open test data sets and provide those results in a manner that people can read and understand them. I also feel the same way about training data on data input. Much earlier in the show, we talked about copyright data being kind of part of this and what happens with that. If we start to open up what goes into these models and how they're built, it starts to set the best example as that trickles down into like enterprise AI and ML teams. At the end of the day, the models that are developed, while that's been the focus over the last year, they're the tool. And now it's up to the individual, to the company, or to the enterprise to build an application around that tool. That's a bag of concrete. Now go build a house with it. It's how you mix that together and how you use that. And the only way you're going to be able to get predictable outcomes from this is a reliable testing framework, so that you can say, for a given input, I get the output. I mean, like you said, these models are all based off an architecture, which their job is to predict the probability of next token. That's what they do for a given input token and tokens behind it. What is the next one and the highest probability? You can kind of tune that in. So I think this comes down to the Microsoft's, Google's, AWS's of the world to say, hey, this is how we test our foundational models. Here's the data sets. Here's the benchmarks. Here's the results. You can also go run these same tests with these same data sets and the same results. And I think that sets a very good example of what we should be doing. And that will start to trickle down, because it will be the expectation.
So let's look at this. You guys have both talked about governance, and I think that this dovetails nicely with this whole concept of governance. Dan, what practices should organizations adopt to be able to be effective at training and implementing LLMs while simultaneously ensuring security and privacy and compliance and oversight and control over the data that's being transferred to these models, while preventing either unintentional data exposure to the model during the training or enabling leakage of information after the model's been deployed and is put into production?
So I'll start with the basics. I think, as any other category today in the market, everything starts with inventory, understanding what you have, right? The problem in the industry today is that there is no solutions today to find all your deployed AI models. That's why Dig built it. And I'm not saying this to kind of essentially toot our horn, right? I'm saying this because why aren't there solutions to find all AI models today in your cloud environments or in your on-prem environments? So everything starts with inventory, and I think this problem will get solved in the next year. It must get solved, right? Because organizations need to understand what AI models essentially they have across the organizations, whether it is managed solutions like OpenAI on Azure or Bedrock on AWS or Vertex on GCP, or either it is self-hosted ones, like someone training a Llama model on top of a VM in a specific cloud. So inventory is going to start and kick off this type of problem. Now, once you already know what you have, you need to start answering key questions. What data is it accessing? Who is using the specific model? Is it a human? Is it a machine? Is it accessible to the world, so anyone can ask questions to that model, or is it an internal app, and that's probably less strict? Am I allowed to do this? That's a big question in a lot of the organizations that we speak to. Am I allowed to properly connect patient data into the specific model? Am I allowed to properly connect PCI data into the specific model? So there's a lot of privacy and compliance implications to this. And then, of course, verifying that the actual model is secure itself, that this model cannot leak information either by a bad input or poisoning or anything bad that might happen. So it will start from discovery, move over to posture and understanding usage, and then it will actually move into the model itself security. But all of this will kind of happen in tandem. Okay. So that's kind of my prediction of what's going to happen. Of course, we're building it, and I think others are probably building it as well, because this is probably the top request from most of our customers when it comes to AI.
So, Greg, let's turn to you. Same question. What kind of practices should organizations adopt to effectively train and implement these LLMs while ensuring the proper governance that we've been talking about throughout this past half hour or so?
Yeah, I mean, Dan's bang on. Like it comes down to cataloging. It's not only what models are used, what versions of those models, what frameworks did you use to train that. And then I think is kind of one of the most important thing is being able to freeze your model weights, which are kind of the output of your training session. Freeze the weights with the data set that was used to do train, test, validate on them. So now that you have a complete end-to-end view over this model, this version was trained on this data and got these results out of my trained process. Now you have a snapshot of that. You're able to kind of fingerprint that. And being able to have kind of a traveling fingerprint of this model that was encoded or used this data that's also fingerprinted kind of helps to build out a more robust catalog of what models, what the model is. And then being able to add in layers around this that help describe that, which can then lead to automated ways of being able to allow access to that model. But a lot of this is still kind of really early days. Like if you look back a year and a half ago, a lot of internal ML teams, like they built their own stuff. They just kind of like said, give me an S3 bucket and I'll attach it into my SageMaker environment. I'll just dump data into it so that I can go re-access it. Because it was only a couple of people that understood how to use this stuff. So tools don't really exist, like Dan was saying. But I think at the end of the day, a lot of this gets folded back into the model. The model should be smart enough to know, hey, for a given piece of input data, I know this is actually sensitive data. I'm not going to send that through the neural net that token is not going to go through the net for prediction. It's going to be redacted. And built-in model redaction for sensitive data and being able to have it understand sensitive data, classified data, so it can self-redact, self-mitigate that risk of data going into it, and then data coming back out. Again, it should know, is this data that I'm spitting back out as next token generation, should this be redacted? Should this be alerted in any way, shape, and form? And from a security perspective, these models need to understand, hey, is there any sort of inference injection that's happening here? If you look at LLMs, the ability to inject and overwrite instructions in a prompt is a thing. And people need to understand that, like, hey, I can now interrupt a prompt's kind of execution string, have it skip down to a very bottom piece of malicious prompt and execute on it. We started to solve some of these problems, but again, in a non-uniform fashion, this needs to be built into the frameworks that train these models. They need to be built into the model weights themselves so that we know predictably how secure these things are going to act around the data.
So one of the things that you said just now, raised some thoughts. I mean, you used the term fingerprint, and when I think about what that might mean, it's essentially saying there's some context around data that is relevant both for what the data is and its use. So that what you were just describing is there is an individual who is typing in a prompt to an LLM, and yes, the data that has fed into that LLM. Maybe there are constraints about use, and so it's smart enough to know that the data which the model's been trained is there's a restriction to the actual user to be using that, and so we're going to redact that, or we're going to modify the answer to the question. But there's also context, the same way Dan was talking about categorization and classification of data in terms of different sensitivities. And sensitivity means something different environments, jurisdictions, places, as well as the context in which the user sitting at the prompt is as well. So the same way Dan said, CCPA and GDPR, the context is associated with the user who's sitting in California or sitting in Canada or sitting in Germany. And so it sounds like there is a need for kind of not just the semantic interpretation of the content itself, but the addition of a layer of metadata that informs the data security posture. So where do you see our tools evolving? I mean, Dan, you said it's going to be a couple of years before we really solve this, but how do we start integrating that into that infrastructure?
That's a really interesting problem, and it's a dynamic problem. When I think of dynamic problems and language models, language models are actually really good at solving dynamic problems based on kind of input stimuli. And if you look at like what's come out of autonomous agent frameworks, where it can then now interact with language models or multiple language models and multiple external dynamic or static data sources. What I mean by that is a dynamic data source could be a REST API endpoint. Maybe it could be querying a data security posture management solution to be able to kind of figure out more information about that piece of data or that user or that location that they're in. And then be able to say, hey, there's a given question that came in from this user. Let me find out more about that user, their location. Well, now that they're allowed to use these particular models and access these other particular static data sources, whether they be vector databases or traditional relational databases, to kind of help do that. So you can offload some of that into an application layer framework where the model is able to self-reason based upon those external stimuli, those external kind of entities that are also dynamic themselves. So as rules and regulations change and as people's roles, locations change, those get updated. Pushing them all down into the model becomes a very expensive problem, because anytime a change happens, you need to go through a training process, which is extremely painful and very expensive. So being able to kind of take the lightweight reasoning infrastructure of a language model plus dynamic rules generation from your internal IT tools plus location information and put a lot of that logic in an application layer, that it makes a ton of sense.
Okay, so Dan, Greg jumped on top of that one for you, so gave you a little bit of time to think. Your thoughts?
I couldn't have answered it better. I mean, I think Greg actually opened my thoughts a little bit about this specific topic and maybe another startup idea. But
yeah, you know what? We should talk, because believe it or not, I'm actually working on agent-based simulations and looking at evolving dynamic rule-based system for you to be able to modify the environment. So maybe we should all have a call after this one.
Definitely. So I think it's a really cool concept. I believe that in general, I don't think each model should implement something like that on its own. I think it needs to be something that is shared and open source, or a specific solution that will already do this type of dynamic reasoning. So I think Greg answered this perfectly.
Agent infrastructure is really cool. And you're kind of using the best of both worlds, real-time streaming data, dynamic data, static data, and LLM's ability to reason kind of help solve some of these problems for you.
Yeah, maybe we can cycle back with the solutions review folks to do another roundtable on integrating agent-based simulations and those types of things in the security framework. But I want to kind of bring both of you guys together. I've heard about a recent partnership announcement between Dig Security and Cohesity. Could you? I'll go to Dan first. Provide some more details on how these two companies are going to collaborate and the advantages of this partnership.
I don't think that there's any enterprise today that doesn't back up their information, right? I mean, that's why Cohesity has been growing so quickly, and other vendors in this specific category, both because of compliance and, of course, business continuity, right? Now, a lot of these organizations are mandated, first off, by compliance to back up any type of data of a specific type, of a specific sort, right? Let's say all healthcare information needs to be backed up, or PCI information needs to be backed up. And second, So how do we essentially bring this context into probably one of the best data backup vendors in the markets? So what we did with this type of partnership today, or not today, but a couple of weeks ago, what we did with this partnership is essentially we give each other context. We talk about the state of backup and the state of business continuity controls around data, and we essentially bring in the context of the information itself. What type of information it is? Can I make sure that all information of a specific type or a specific region is essentially securely stored? So this kind of integration and discussion points between the different companies is what enables new types of scenarios to a lot of organizations that up until now were not compliant or were not able to essentially accomplish this before.
So, Greg, thoughts about the types of customers who might benefit from this partnership and combined solutions?
Really, any customer that has employees that have a pulse or can breathe, I think are the target ones. Now, it makes total sense if you think about it. These two tools working together also bring together two of the most important functions within an IT organization: security team and the data management, data protection teams. This allows them to talk across a common set of application stacks and be able to exchange data. So now the backup team knows what's going on from a security perspective at kind of all times because of a data feed. And the security team knows the state of all of the backup solutions. So now when something does happen, the teams are completely in sync and know what needs to be remediated. They know at what point in time things need to be restored to and from. They can also trigger full automation flows and workbooks programmatically, and being able to bring these together natively without having to go do it in another third-party tool outside kind of reduces that time to action. And from a security perspective, time to action, I think, is one of the most critical metrics, or time to remediation, maybe is a better way to put it, is one of the most critical components to measure. And bringing together these two data feeds and these two awesome companies together can only help a large enterprise.
Thanks. So I think we've got time for one last question. I'm gonna ask it more in terms of a kind of a rapid fire, which is an organization. Folks from an organization have been watching this panel discussion. They acknowledge the need for a data security framework for the cloud-based AI strategy. Dan, what's the first thing that you should tell them to do now that they've decided that they agree with all of us and that they need something like this? What should they be doing?
Understand what type of data is going to go in, what type of data is going to go out, and how they're going to govern it. That's the basics. Understanding what you have and how to protect it.
Greg, let's go to you on that one.
Internally, get your stakeholders together cross-functionally. You need to have collaboration and cooperation internally first. You can't have fiefdoms. And then do what Dan said.
So I'm going to summarize what you guys just said. It sounds like there's two perspectives. One is the social component of it, which is what Greg was saying. Understand what the needs are in the organization. I'm kind of paraphrasing what you just said, and then one is what we might call the data intelligence side, which is knowing what your data usage patterns are. What have you got? What don't you have? Where's it coming from? Where's it going? What do you need to do in order to get a better understanding of what's in there? And then, again, just kind of summarize a little bit more. You guys are talking about using AI both as a enabler for your data security posture management frameworks, and as well as an enablement layer for making an organization's AI strategy work. Let me go to you guys for one last pitch or one last comment. Let's go to Greg first.
My last thing to say is, look, the Gen AI world is moving very fast. These are the weeks where decades are made. Don't make any rash decisions. You do need to understand what's important to your organization. You need to understand what data should be used, because that's going to be what powers your next wave of innovation internally. But do it collaboratively within your organization. Work together and root out any sort of shadow AI that's happening in your organization. And do it with Cohesity and Dig.
Dan, let's go to you. Final viewpoint, final comments.
It's coming. It's here. You don't need to fear it. You just need to understand how to think about it, and then align your executives and align the right technologies to help you cope with it. That's how I look at it.
Well, thank you, Dan. Thank you, Greg. Dan from Dig Security and Greg from Cohesity. I appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation today. And I'm going to hand it back to Doug. And thanks a lot.
Thanks, David. Great conversation, incredibly timely discussion. Dan, Greg, thank you for your participation. Well, there you have it. Another expert roundtable in our books. We want to thank Dig Security and Cohesity for their participation, and we appreciate your attendance as well. Until next time, I'm Doug Atkinson here at Solutions Review. Thanks for watching.